Welcome to another episode in the conversation series with my old friend, mentor, guru of ganja, Ed Rosenthal. Really needs no introduction. If you've been growing, you'll know his name. You know, his books put so many of us on the track, and, cannabis wouldn't be where it was today if Ed hadn't illuminated the way for so many of us. So I love having a chat with him, and I'm really thrilled that he's happy to come on and have a recorded chat with me, because every time we have a chat, I think, man, if we recorded this, people would get a kick out of listening to this. And you've just come back from an amazing trip not long ago with noble intentions built in. And I know you've always got a great story to tell and a great perspective on the scene wherever you are. Like, you could talk for days about what's going on in the States or state by state, and, but then at other countries too. So you just were in India, and, I look forward to hearing more about it for sure. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we're lucky to have you, man. Always appreciated. So let me ask you, before you get started on your latest travels, I want to ask you, when was the first time you remember being exposed to cannabis or getting high?
Well, when I was in college, I entered college at a really early age, and I was in the folk music club, and so I did get exposed to cannabis. But I didn't smoke at first, not until I was like 18 or so.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's reasonable. What was the first thing you smoked? You got any ideas? You remember?
Mexican,
Yeah.
seeded Mexican.
Yeah.
That's what was
Makes
around.
stands to reason. What year would that have
There
been?
was also some Colombian around. I think.
Oh, yeah. Was that always a head up from the Mexican?
Yeah, yeah. It was
Yeah.
it was much higher quality.
You know what I had to show you? I found today. You gave me this hat, Ask Ed, in the
Yeah.
90s in Vancouver. Classic, eh? Old hemp hat. It says, "Do not smoke this cap."
From the very first time that I used marijuana, I knew that it was going to be a long-term relationship. And it's a woman who I've had longest relationship with, longer than my wife, longer than my relationship with my mother. So
That's serious.
yeah, no separation in sight.
No separation in sight. Well, you guys have done well together. You've done well by each other, I'll say,
Yeah.
That's for sure. So tell us about your latest mission in India.
Well, so I have a history in India in that I visited India 40 years ago, 45 years, well, 40 years ago in 1981. And uh, at that time, cannabis was legal. They had signed a single convention on narcotics and dangerous drugs in 1961, but they had 25 years to clean up their act. And so they were still growing it legally. And I happened to be on a train passing through the middle of the country when I saw these fields. And I made a detour and got permission from the state government to visit the fields, which were being harvested. This was in December, and it was all regulated by the government. And so I got to photograph it. So in 1986, it became illegal. It's been illegal for 40 years. And about 4 years ago, I decided to take those photos that I had taken of the harvest I decided to take those photos and bring them and make a book, a little, uh, a small book about it. And um, then while doing that, I got to thinking about what a shame it is that cannabis was illegal in India, where it was one of where, it's part of the religion and it's been around for 7,000 years. And then some government says it should be illegal. It's criminal. So, uh, Jane and I decided to go to India and take an exploratory thing about it and see whether we could help with saving the land races and also be sort of cheerleaders to legalization. And first thing I realized, it wasn't legalization. It was legal for 7,000 years. It's been illegal for 40 years. It's re-legalization.
Yeah, it's re-legalization. That's right.
Re-legalization.
Yeah.
So we took a trip. We were there for about 3 weeks in the spring, and everybody that we met were so welcoming, and we felt that we could do so much good as cheerleaders to legalization, re-legalization, that we came back and spent 2 months there uh, this fall. And part of this trip was up in the Himalayas, where we were following a person who was a researcher who was collecting seed from land races. And then we came down and did some legalization work, and we'll be going back this spring.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Very inspiring. It's amazing that you're getting out there and doing it. I remember you had a rally in Gastown when you were on this stage, and it was a commemorative of the Grasstown riots, right?
right.
So I
Yeah.
remember you really giving a strong shout out to freedom. You truly are a strong believer, and you practice what you preach, and that's so cool.
Yeah. So
Beautiful.
I'm going. It's really, I feel it's really important. India has 1.4 billion people. 1.4 billion. I mean, I, you know, United States has 4.5 times the number of people as the United States. It has this gigantic population, and it has a history of bong, which is a um, concentrate um, made by boiling leaves. And it has a history of one of the three main gods, Shiva, using bong all the time. And then the government has the nerve to say, "Oh, but we're going to make uh, you can use bong, but nothing else, and we're going to make this herb illegal." And you know, even even if they're using it for Ayurvedic medicine, they have to concentrate it from leaf that has no more than 0.35% THC. 0.35%, not 3.5, 0.35, a third of a percent. And they have to concentrate it from that stuff. I wrote a book about that, Trash to Stash. And that was when um, cannabis was really expensive because of prohibition. And so you could, the leaves had 3 to 5% THC, but they demand that Ayurvedic companies work with leaves from plants before they flower. Can you imagine
Not
that?
very efficient. Not
I
very
mean,
efficient.
it, it's criminal because it's so hard to get a good concentrate from that. So there are two fronts that we're looking at, which is a religious front, in that Shiva used cannabis all the time, and secondly, uh, the medical, that people shouldn't be deprived of good medicine. So it's like being in the United States or Canada in the 1970s. It's incredible how it's in the middle of the drug war.
Yeah. It's
Just
still everywhere, but it's highly illegal. It's
but yes,
it's so
yeah.
ingrained in the cultures, it's never going away. It's just cruel, to punish people for the herbs. And that's not just medicine, but as medicine they can grow themselves, you know?
Well, you know what? There's been a 65-year campaign to convince Indian people that cannabis is not beneficial at all, but highly addictive, and all of the all the
It's the
terrible
reefer
things.
madness.
And meanwhile, they're promoting alcohol. Can you imagine
Sure,
that?
Indian whiskey, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not
So
allergic to whiskey, but I honestly have never had the Indian whiskey. I heard they're coming
yeah,
up, but who
well,
knows?
here it's considered modern to drink alcohol rather than to use cannabis.
Oh yeah, when do they figure out you can do both at once? You have two hands.
I'm not saying alcohol should be illegal, but I don't think they should be promoting it.
They should just get out of everybody's way, I think, and let people do their thing.
Well, what I'm trying to do is work on two areas, as I said. One is the medical, and that is for the most serious diseases and symptoms. And the second area is the religious, that that the way that cannabis is being treated in India right now is an insult to Shiva, and we should only expect bad luck from that.
Well, I think by the definition, most of our listeners and us, we use it religiously, as in every day. That's one of the major definitions of religiously is something you do all the time.
But as I said, I mentioned to you before we were recording that I don't use it when I'm sleeping anymore. I've given that up. Just
It's
too
safer that
dan-
way. It's safer
it's
that
just
way.
too dangerous.
Yeah. It's just unbelievable how backwards most places in the world still are about it. And even the more liberated places are still over-regulated, overtaxed. Like they haven't really done it right. They've made some, it's incremental gains, I think. Hemp might crack the door open and then the medical starts getting some compassion. And then eventually it's everywhere and they just say, well, who really cares? If everybody smokes and pays tax on it or grows their own. Like the taxes in a lot of places are ridiculously high. So when we say legalize it and tax it, I think to some degree we got to be careful what we wish for, and you don't want to tax your religious sacrament. When they tax wine, I feel offended.
Well, there are two things. One is I'd like to see them tax alcohol at the same rate that they tax cannabis, and
That
see
would
how
help even
people
it
like.
up. They would definitely start to,
Yeah, I mean,
they'll
because
feel it.
cannabis has so much tax on it. It seems to me that people who are chronic users, you might know a few people like that.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, these few chronic users who use a lot of cannabis, if they're not producing it themselves or involved in the industry in some way, then what they are doing it is buying it more direct than going to a store to buy it. They're buying
Right,
it from a producer or a dealer. And
right.
the higher the tax, the more chronic users have an incentive to find an alternative source. So I would say in California, among chronic users, most of them don't really go to a cannabis shop very often, except if they want a specific product.
Yeah, I would assume so. I always thought that was a big shortfall in the Canadian regs was that they just taxed it so high that, and there was a limit on the size of the package, so you couldn't buy more than 30 grams at a time. But a chronic puffer that doesn't grow themselves, they probably buy QPs or half pounds or pounds for personal because it's a way better deal than buying an ounce at a time, right? So it's just the fact that they don't have bulk sales in the dispensaries really hurts them because the chronic users consume so much more than all the casual users combined.
The stores, because the prices are so high, they act as a price support system for dealers because the dealers just have to sell it for less in the stores.
Yeah, that's a total price support for them. Yeah. It's a gift to the black market.
Yeah. So
Yeah. No, they shoot themselves in the foot, right? All the best intentions.
there's another reason why you can't really control marijuana, which is like, think of any other drug. I don't care what drug you think of, but they all, at some point, there's a narrow, there's a bottleneck in in the whole chain, in the whole chain. For instance, let's take cocaine. Well, probably tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of farmers grow it, but there are only a few processors and even fewer um, exporters from, Peru or Colombia or wherever. And that's where your bottleneck is. So the idea is if you if there's a bottleneck place and you attack that place, then you can control or eliminate supply. So, because up until 20 years ago, cocaine was only coming in through a few distributors and uh, with big shipments. And so if you got those, then the supply went down for a little while. But cannabis does not have a central source of production. There, there, there are entries to both production and use all over the chain. So, and there are some people who are only growing a few pounds, but they're adding to the chain. Then there are, people who are growing a lot. Then there are people who are growing just a little, but enough not to be involved in the chain. It's like whack-a-mole because it's not like there's one central place where, if we seize this, we've eliminated cannabis. It can't happen because cannabis is coming into the market from all different sources all over the place. It's futile. And I was a guest speaker at the sociology of cannabis, and one of the things that I observed was when cannabis was made illegal in 1937, it they estimated there were, get this, over 50,000 cannabis users in the United States. It's a pretty large number. And
Out of a population of what?
and then after like 80 60 years or so, around 2000, there were 50 million cannabis users. Think of it cumulatively that at some point I surmise if it kept going, if the use of cannabis kept going up the way it was going up during Prohibition, I surmise that at some point there'd be more cannabis users than people in the United States.
And
And
you'd
said,
probably smoke a joint with every one of them.
no, no, wait a second, wait. And I thought about that. How could there be more cannabis users than people? You know what it is?
Animals?
Right, it's the pets.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
pets are using cannabis now.
Yeah, the
So that
catnip.
was it. I was right. I was prescient. I didn't realize how prescient I was because I couldn't figure out what it would be. But then I realized it was the canaries and they were singing.
That's why they had to eat the seeds or they don't sing, right? It
That's
reminds me about the pets. Remember, I told you the other day my theory on how they named the Bang Lassie?
right.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
I said it was because after you put one down, you're going to be fucking the dog all afternoon. Yeah. So, where else are you excited about going to check out the landrace stuff?
So I was in Kandwa, India, and got seeds from Kandwa in 1980. And so those seeds were planted, and the results were sent to Phylos to analyze. And Phylos has this Phylos galaxy. And if you look at almost all the varieties, they all fit within this galaxy somewhat. And the material from Kandwa, it was outside the galaxy. It was,
It's in its
yeah,
own galaxy.
it was, you know, it was distinct. You could see it as a North Star from the galaxy. So
That's super
anyway,
cool.
so that was where I had actually taken the photos and everything. But the closer you are to point of origin, the more variation in genetics you'll find the more variation in genetics. And the closest you get, some of the closest places you get to it are in northern India, in the northern states. Now, I haven't been yet to Arunachal Pradesh, which is, if you look at a map of India, all the way to the right, all the way to the top, that's the state that I want to go to. But I've been to other states close to the border, close to the northern border. And so those areas, and I looked at individual populations, and every individual population that I saw there was variation within the population, which is following the the rules of dispersion. That's what it's supposed to be like, especially in that environment. That's what I expected to find, and I found that. And so that means that there's all this genetics in all this northern area with these feral plants, wild and feral plants, and they have genetics that we don't see in the West. Now, I'm not saying they have a lot of it. I'm not saying they're super strong plants. I'm not saying, oh,
No,
I
no,
found this plant and then I woke up 3 days later. Nothing like
no,
that.
no. But it's interesting stuff.
But they have different some of them have different terpenes than Western plants.
Well, that's one of the things I was wanting to ask you about those. What were the aroma profiles and flavor profiles on some of these
It's
things?
too varied. It's
Any
like
standouts?
let's say you took all the seeds in your collection, right? And you mixed them up, shook the jar up, and that's what you planted.
They're just all over the map.
That's what a field looks like.
Wow. So it's probably been a real crossroads of cannabis there.
The next thing is, well, what did the plant look like? Because there's so much variation that just saying it's from a specific place. I mean, like, so if you had two different collectors collecting seed and they brought them home and they both said, this is from this area, the same area, and they looked different, they were all right because that's yes, plants did look like that there.
Hmm.
So it's all in the eyes of the collector.
Whenever there's a broad spectrum like that, I always find there's some that I like and some that I don't like. Was there any that stuck out to you, either
Well, there were,
plus or negative?
I would say the most unusual, I'll tell you the most unusual was a plant. It was no more than 50, 60 centimeters high, but it was about 3 feet round.
Yeah. What did it smell like?
It wasn't ready, it was
Oh,
later
okay, okay.
than other plants. But and the plants, when you get up into the hills of the Himalayas, they don't harvest bud. They rub the bud.
Right. You rub the bud and smell it, right? Well, if there's bud.
But you see, you're rubbing bud after bud.
Yeah, I know, I
So
know.
it's really a mixture of buds. So they go after buds that seem to have more, that seem to be more developed, or like a lot of this stuff. You remember the variety Dr. Grinspoon?
I've seen pictures of it. I've never tried it.
It looked more like wheat or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
than grass.
I've had ones like that, like in Indonesian ones that look like that
Yeah,
too.
that's what a lot of the plants look like. But they rub those plants and get the glands off them. And I mean, the hills are so steep. I I mean, I've never climbed the Rockies, but pictures that I've seen of the Rockies are not like this. These are these are cliffs. Not cliffs. I mean, it's just steep, very, very steep. And people make villages there. Some of the villages, there's no motorized way of getting there. You have to take a trail to get there. And then some of the people go. They actually do have small flat areas above the villages, but it might take an hour to climb up to it, and I couldn't do it. Jane Jane was on it. I, I was on a mule, but I didn't. That didn't agree with me. But Jane went up with the people.
You went back to Bang Lassie, right?
Uh, I I went back and lay in bed for a day.
Jane is a super trooper. You've been really blessed to have her for the love of your life.
There's this fall every time they as they move, bop, like a horse, bop, ba-da, ba-da, and it wasn't good for my hip. So,
No, yeah,
but Jane went up all the way.
she's a super
But,
trooper.
but then they went up. They were going up. One day they were going up to some fields, and I couldn't believe what the trails were like to get to the fields. Unbelievable. I mean, I didn't go. I saw pictures. I have pictures of it. So that's the Himalayas, and but it's very important that seed be collected from those areas because that's where you'll find the most variation in genetics.
Well, yeah, you don't want to have prohibition as state destroy all the genetics. Like so many genetics have been lost over time, but
They can. It's like destroying dandelions.
well, in a way, but people are going to bring stuff up as well. They're
No,
going
no,
to,
no, no. That's the second thing. But
yeah, that's a second
in
thing, but
terms
it's
of
it's part
in
and parcel.
terms of eliminating cannabis, it would be like trying to eliminate dandelions.
I realize it, but I'm just
You
saying
know,
lots of accessions have been lost over time
well,
that
here
can be blamed on prohibition.
you are absolutely right, and this is a race against time.
Uh,
Collecting these varieties is a race against time, and we can see two examples of that. And that is the first is Morocco. And when I first was to Morocco 40 years ago, um, the, the plants came in the last week of August, and they were single stem. And now the plants there because because of the seeds that hash dealers would bring from Western Europe year after year. The plants no longer are single stem, and they mature later.
I'm guilty of that. In 2001, I sat in Algeciras selling shishka berry seeds to Moroccan farmers, so I know I'm part of the problem there. But it hasn't hurt them overall. I think their quality's going up all the time.
Look, it isn't a problem. It's like this. if you were a farmer, and you're growing these traditional varieties, and somebody's offering you seed from varieties that are more valuable and that are better quality and that will produce more, of course you're going to use them. So you can't blame the farmers for it, and you can't blame the um, importers for wanting to improve the farmers' quality. The big thing is not to keep the farmers using that material, but to preserve that material so that it can be used for breeding and research purposes. But basically, those varieties are all so similar because there's no way to control
Yeah, it's
pollination.
just acclimatization and mixogenation. They're all the strong survive and pollinate each other, and that's just what's going to keep happening
Well,
there.
that's part of it, yes. Yeah, but there's no way to control pollination.
Well, other than having infertile plants, but that's another story.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another story. I know I was actually chatting with a Spanish slash Moroccan friend this morning about infertile plants over there, and he said there's been issues with the triploids and that there's overall, there's some impressive features about them, but also that they make too big a bud for their climate and they get more mold and had some other issues just because it maybe wasn't the right plants that they used to make triploids. I don't know, because they maybe weren't acclimatized to begin with, right? So, but interesting to see all the progression in the genetics, of course. But I would like to invite you. I just had good news since we spoke last. I've been part of getting the company off the ground in Ghana in West Africa, and we've got 400-hectare field to plant on the big river there, the Volta, and then on the greenfield site in the duty free by the port, we'll have the processing area and everything. So that yesterday, Ghana finally released the regs. It's been like this year there's an election, now it's going to happen, now it's going to take another year, and it's just been dragging out. So it's been like 3-4 years since I started assisting this group, and the one partner's very prominent citizen over there. So he had copy number one of the regs when they came out yesterday, and then they were all over the news. So in the face of it for Ghana, there is strictly for zero point 0.3 THC, but that was what the government knew it could get through because it faced a lot of opposition. But they left room for the agent in the government that's in charge of it. I can't think of the position exactly off the top of my head, but they're able to grant exemptions. So for the research and for our export, we should be able to finagle that. But it's nice to have a sea level, was almost sea level, and it's 2 degrees off the equator. It's in the flatlands just below the dam in the Volta. It's a huge, huge freshwater source that never goes down. And we've already had some expeditions out documenting seed patches or patches and collecting seed. And within, the first day's travel, basically everything's polluted with European stuff. And then if you go further, you got to go a lot further up the river till you get to where there's the pure Ghana lines. And there's a lot of different ones because there's a ton of languages and different tribes and chieftains all over the country. And you know, they've got their own lines that they've been saving forever. And it's still very illegal and punitive. But most of the country, I think the government isn't that present. So it's more just kind of the tribal traditions are what hold in a lot of these places. But, if you're closer to the civilization, let's say, and you have a roadblock and you've got some herb, you're going to have some real problems there. And I don't think a West African prison would be any fun for anybody, But it'll be amazing to have the first big test crops going on. So it'd be awesome if you want to come and visit them. You're welcome to.
Well, I have this negative attitude towards countries that have these harsh anti-gay laws, you
Yeah.
know, and so I'd rather I'd rather work in countries with a different environment.
Well, I think we owe it to the world to help change those places too. So I mean, I've thought about it the same way, and I talked to my partner
They,
there about
they
it.
they're getting worse right now. They're on the negative streak because there are all these U.S. Evangelical Christians, missionaries who've been working on these countries for 30 and 40 years.
Yeah,
That's what you're up against.
yeah,
So,
but still, I mean, you don't win over a conservative area by shunning it. You've got to share the light, share the love, and you never know. You get it. I'm not
well,
saying
I like
it's going to
India.
be instantaneous. Well, India's cool. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
never been. I'm way overdue. You've invited me a couple
India,
times now.
it's like I'm sure Ghana is like this too. It's outside of Western civilization.
Hmm,
On the other hand, India has, I think it has much more comfort. Like there's air conditioning, and you don't
right.
have to worry
India's
about
more
this.
developed, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about you know, the healthfulness of the food, and those things anymore. You don't see people starving. You see them too fat. Everybody's too fat there. I
Is
mean,
that right?
all middle class, yeah. Yeah, a middle class guy, 40 years old, is going to have a big belly.
I mean, you can think about we like to boycott prohibitionist countries, but then we'd have nowhere to go. So, I mean, at some level, we got to just stand up and, you know, speak out against it.
Like either I have no ego or too much ego. And I say, well, America was practice. Now let's get to the real job.
Yeah, the rest of the world. You,
India, India,
yeah,
1.5 billion people.
that's a huge chunk, man. That's a huge chunk, and it's been such an integral part of their culture for
Right.
millennia that it's insane that it's 40 years of this nonsense. And thanks to the Western influence, of course, but it doesn't, it wasn't like that's why China does it. They don't really care what the West says. They're just dicks because they can be too. I don't understand what is behind it all. Like the universal canophobia, like it's just overblown. It's so crazy. And it's
So,
everywhere.
so look, you know, so um, Jane had this saying, she was in business. She says, you have to be the cheapest, the best, or the only. And you know what? I've been all three of those at different times. And um, it's far easier being the only.
Don't I remember you telling me that in the 90s.
Yeah.
I totally
And
remember that. Always
and
stuck with me as an Edism. And you said, somebody had told you you're going to be the best at what you do. And you said, I'm not smart enough to be the best at what I do. He said, you can be the cheapest at what you do. He said, I don't really want to be the cheapest at what I do. You can be the only one at what you do. And you're like, that sounds like fun. You know?
yeah. So so here I am, the only European type guy going around in India saying you have to legalize,
Good for
re-legalize.
you.
And it's great being the only.
Shines up the karma, man. Shines up the karma. Are you going to swim in the Ganges?
We were up uh, mu- uh, closer to where the ganges originated, and people were um, canoeing and things there and kayaking, but it was the wrong season to go in the water. But in Varanasi, it's very, very polluted. Not recommended, really.
No, it doesn't have a strong appeal to me, that's for sure.
No, no.
But maybe
But
the beaches around
we
Goa or something.
we were way upstream in this resort area, and people were using it recreationally.
You know, Sri Lanka, what do you think of what they have there genetically? Do you have any idea?
No, but I'm not interested. But it's south, and I'm interested in the north. I'm not saying the plants look good, but they have a lot of genetics in them. So, if, let's say they have some great genetics, but they look like wheat flour. That doesn't matter because
Yeah.
you can move that genetics to a different plant. So
Well, yeah, you
that's
can study it, see what it has. There's because a lot of the stuff hasn't been really studied.
I'm trying to get the states more interested in preserving this. So we'll
Yeah,
see how it goes.
conservation efforts.
Yeah.
That's a real noble effort to see that it happens, whether it's public or private. As long as it's getting done, it's good.
Well, it's too big a project to be done privately. It's just it's just unbelievable.
I
Anyway,
I like the Corolla herb I grew from South India a long, long time ago. It had like that faint baby aspirin, faint like candied orange, synthetic orange smell. It really reminded me of baby aspirin. I forget what they call that. There's a name for that line.
they have a lot of sativas. Those
Yeah, but they were so nice. Like they're very different than the stuff from the Himalayas. Uh,
Yes, you're right.
I
Absolutely
think
right.
I was talking to my friend Erasnig that I'd introduced you to, and he's done, I think, in our lifetimes, or maybe of all time, no one has done a better job cataloging and collecting genetics from all over the place. He just brings so much insight into the region and into the specifics of what's found there. And he's absolutely a super nice guy to hang with. Really like him. I know you guys will get along great, and you should. He was going to give me a tour. I've got a standing invitation for years to go and visit North and South India with him in the different harvest seasons so we can go for treks through the most interesting places. So it'll be fun. Well, anything else new you want to let us know?
Let's see. So, if anybody's interested in helping to collect seed, they should get in touch with you, and I'll get their information from you.
Where they can get in touch directly with you, right? You're not hard
Yeah,
to find. You're out there.
yeah, yeah. Just look on my websites and different sites. Yeah,
Yeah, you've got websites and Instagram and YouTube and stuff like that, right?
well, I have all those. Yeah,
Yeah. Do you run those or do you have somebody run them for you?
I work. I work with the graphic artists.
I was wondering when I saw you puffing with the sadhus or something up in the hills. You're in a cave puffing with guys in India, and I thought, I wonder who's shooting that. If it's Jane or who it
Where's
was.
Jane?
Was it Jane shooting that? Cool, cool.
Yeah.
I always think about Jane as I remember that time we were roommates and we went out for dinner in Lugano, and she's like, "How do I tell him that was great?" And I said, "Today grappa," and the waiter came out with the 3 shots of grappa, and she's like, "I didn't order those," and he just flipped. That was hilarious, and then we all had a shot of grappa and laughed about it. That was a good time. I have some fond memories for sure. You know what? You were talking about the other day. You were very excited. You've got a breeding program going on for the single spear plants.
Yes.
So
Well,
what can you tell us about those?
well, I'm working on it, and the idea of it is that if they only have a single butt, um, you don't have to stake them, you don't have to train them, you don't have to do anything,
Yeah.
and you can plant them really close together, and then they're really easy to harvest.
You prefer that over high density planting to high density, you can kind of achieve the same thing like with hemp fields where they're,
With a single stem, you
yeah,
you have more control.
yeah, well, they are single stem. If you're just sowing like 90 seeds a square meter, like in hemp fields, and you're just getting like everything's growing like matchsticks, you know? But
Yeah, but this way you can control the spacing so that each has a large bud.
yeah, no, you're not growing the stem for, you're not getting paid for stem.
Yeah, they each have a piece of the canopy.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
nice to, you have bud right to the bottom. And I think you sent me some pictures of them. They looked great.
yeah, yeah.
What were you building those with? Like any special starting material, or is it proprietary? I don't know. I was just curious.
No, no, it's just that was genetics,
Okay,
and
it's just something you found.
and the planting material. I mean, it was just regular like regular planting material.
Okay. Do you have any favorites, smell wise or taste from your stand up line? Are they released yet?
No, what I'm doing is working on doing some genetic experiments first, and then based on the results of the experiments, I should know whether whether it's one gene or more, and I should know whether it's a recessive or not. Like, so that's what I'm working on. And then based on that, there are different ways to proceed depending on what the results are. But ultimately, what I want to be able to do is to take this gene and to put it into, you know, through classical breeding and other, but to put it into any plant that you want, so that let's say you have a great plant that you love the plant, but but this way you could make it into a single stem plant. It would be basically the same plant but single stem. Well, you that might
Beautiful.
be really good.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm not interested in the variety as much as I'm interested in
The
uh
taxonomy.
uh, yeah, and how to use
Yeah.
that gene. Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Interesting. I think that's refreshing because it's not something most people are working on. Is they're not thinking as much about the taxonomy of the plant, and
yeah.
that's when you find a stable dominant one for that, and you can put it on anything, right?
Well, it's better to have a stable recession.
Really, it'll come back.
It's easier to develop it.
Interesting.
Like development is easier if it's a recessive. So if it's a dominant, you're liable in a field, if you're brown bagging it, you're liable to get some plants that don't have that gene, so that you'd have a mixed field.
Mm.
But it's easier with a recessive.
That's
Anyway,
interesting strategy.
yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we
So
always learn something talking to you, man. I appreciate it.
that's what I'm working on. I don't know how successful that will be, but we'll see.
Yeah, you gotta follow what you feel like you want to pursue, you know?
And meanwhile, uh, the whole India thing is it's very different being there, being in a culture that's based on different precepts than the ones that we have in Western culture.
Well, my oh my. I appreciate your time today, man. It's always nice chatting to you. It's the first time I've ever seen you face to face here in a while. We've had a few calls on the phone, but
Yeah.
neither of us are getting any better looking, that's for sure. Oh my. Well, I don't have any other questions for you right now, but if you want to tell me anything else, you're welcome to.
Well, if people are interested, they can get some information on what I'm doing at edrosenthal.com and goes to my Instagram and website and stuff.
Perfect. And
Yeah.
and definitely if you haven't read his books, you owe it to yourself to read them, you know.
Well,
He's the man. This is Ask Ed, the guru of ganja.
well, if you're even if you're already growing and a good grower, uh, you might want to look at the book Cannabis Growers Handbook because it has a lot of advanced material in it. So I think you'll find it useful. And that book is also excellent for beginners because you don't have to read all the advanced material in order to grow a great garden. And let me just say one more thing. Let me warn you about this. Using marijuana may not be habit forming, but growing it is addictive.
Wise men once said. I've heard you say that a few times for sure. It's a good one. Uh, Chestnut, a solid Ed chestnut. Well,
Okay,
listen,
well,
man.
thank you for having me and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, man, we'll do it again. You have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.
Lots of love.
Bye.
Take care.